Hey everybody, this is Cecil Alexander with Jazz Lesson Videos, and today we're going to be talking about playing convincingly in the different eras of jazz, stylistically speaking. All the phrases that we're going to be taking a look at today come from my latest resource with Jazz Lesson Videos, The Evolution of Jazz Phrases. The resource includes 112 different phrases covering early jazz or trad jazz, swing era jazz, bebop, post bop, modal jazz, and contemporary jazz. All of the phrases are notated in all 12 keys and include recordings and backing tracks to accompany. So if you want to check out this resource, you can find the link in the description below, and feel free to use the coupon code EVOLUTION5 for an additional $5 off. So the first style that we're going to take a look at is bebop. So this is, a really important style of jazz and still has a really big impact on the way that modern soloists play. Even when you hear, soloists go into all these different directions harmonically or play all these outside sounds, a lot of what ties that language together is bebop. It's kind of the foundation of modern jazz vocabulary at this point. So some really important jazz guitar soloists to check out to improve your bebop playing just from a listening perspective would be people like Grant Green, Wes Montgomery, Tal Farlow, Jimmy Rainey. Those are just some of my personal favorites. So bebop is going to be characterized by, use of all this really dense harmonic information that's still just kind of built off of the foundational chord sound, right? So you have what we had in the swing era jazz lines where you're stacking these arpeggios off different chord tones to highlight more tense harmonies. So, things like arpeggios off the third or the fifth or the seventh of different chords. But you also have the use of more advanced chromaticism, advanced rhythmic approaches, rhythmic variations, things like that, as well as the use of bebop scales occasionally, depending on the soloist that you're listening to. So the line that we're going to take a look at happens over a 2-5-1 in C. And we first start off with G on D minor 7. And this is going to be part of a diatonic approach into the 9th of D minor 7 first. So we get there using a little rhythmic variation, those 2 16th notes. And then we have another chromatic approach into the root of D minor 7. Back up to the flat third, using a diatonic passing tone. And then I highlight this G sharp, which against D minor 7 is going to be the flat 5, but I'm already thinking of it as being like the flat 9 of the G7 that's going to come half a beat later, right? So this sound over G7, D minor 7 flat 5 over G7 is giving you this dominant 7 flat 9 with a sus 4 sound and the natural 13, which I think is really, tense. And then we immediately lower that 13 to the flat 13. That's a voice leading trick you'll see a lot in bebop, is going from this sort of sound. So natural 13, flat 13, and then sometimes 9 on the 1 chord. So we hit that flat 13, and then we move down to this chromatic approach. It's going to get us to the root of the C major 7 that's coming up. We move just down the scale, basically, so like a C major bebop scale. All right, so C major bebop is just going to be the C major scale with a G sharp or A flat added, and that's just to put the chord tones of C major 6 on strong beats. So root, 6, 5th, and then the 3rd, and we move down just a major 6 arpeggio or A minor 7. And then we have that melodic tag at the end, so the 9th to the root. And then we have this setup into D minor 7, so this is going to be like an imaginary A7. All right, so then we again have a diatonic approach into the flat 3rd. Then we have this shape again, right, the 6th. Later we'll get into the use of some pivot arpeggios, which is just an arpeggio variation trick, but that's kind of where this contour comes from, is So you'll hear a lot of people like leap down a 6 like that and then jump back up into the same range that they were in before. Right? So leap down, leap back up, and then a decorated chromatic enclosure into the root of D minor 7. And then we highlight some altered tensions on our G7, right? So that's going to be the sharp 9, flat 9, root, dominant bebop scale passing tone with that F sharp. So dominant bebop scale is just G mixolydian with a natural 7 added, again to put the chord tones of that chord on strong beats. And then we resolve into the third of C major 7, and then we just have this little bebop cliche at the end, right? Which is borrowed from Thelonious Monk. So that's another thing that you'll find with a lot of bebop soloists compared to earlier jazz styles is the use of melodic quotes that are borrowed from, other soloists, but also from tunes that jazz musicians have written as well. It's just kind of like a musician's insider joke, basically. So our next bebop style line is going to happen over a minor 2-5-1. So this one's going to start off with kind of decorated enclosure into the flat 5 of D minor 7, flat 5, right? Then we have a pivot arpeggio, which I mentioned in the previous line, but this is basically just going to be taking an arpeggio and dropping the top 3 notes down 1 octave, which is really common in bebop. So, right. So we have this A flat major 7 arpeggio that's happening over D minor 7 flat 5, and that's a really common way of highlighting the flat 5th of that chord, but just again with this octave displacement, this pivot arpeggio. Then we take the flat 7 of G7 and we just go down like a G Phrygian dominant scale. A lot of times soloists will just think of this as playing C harmonic minor, which is where you're going to end up eventually, but you're just playing this over the 5 chord. We resolve down into the flat 3rd of C minor 7, and then we just kind of go up this arpeggio figure, right? So I'm playing like a decorated E flat major 7 sharp 5 arpeggio, which is just going to give me like a C minor major 7 sound. And then I highlight the 6, which is also integral to that minor major 7 sound. Then for our next little section of this phrase, we have more rhythmic variation getting into the 11th of D minor 7 flat 5. And then again, a diatonic approach into the flat 5th. Here we have a 4-note melodic cell. This is, again, A flat major. So we had the A flat major 7 arpeggio. This is just going to be 1, 2, 3, and 5 of A flat major against D minor 7 flat 5. And that last note, E flat, is a little dissonant, but we resolve it down a half step into D. On G7, we move down the G7, again, Phrygian dominant scale. But here we have that bebop scale passing tone. So that F sharp, I land on the 9th of C minor 7, diatonic approach into the flat 3rd. And then here we have like this E flat major 7 flat 5 arpeggio shape that you'll see a lot of bebop soloists use. Right, so if I think of E flat as the root of that idea, it's 1, 3, flat 5, and then natural 7. That can be stacked against all sorts of different chords to create extended sounds. Became a little bit more prominent in the Post Bop era. So I hope those concepts of bebop scales, pivot arpeggios, extended chromatic approaches and enclosures help you solo more convincingly in bebop style. So our next style that we're going to take a look at is Post Bop. So this is a continuation of the bebop language. Like I mentioned before, with these more contemporary styles, bebop is still going to be like the foundation or the glue, but soloists were just going in more adventurous directions harmonically. So some prominent soloists in this style that you might want to check out for listening would be people like Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, John Coltrane, McCoy Tyner, even guitarists like John McLaughlin or Alan Holdsworth are really coming from a post bop direction in terms of the way that they play over chord changes. The lines that we're going to take a look at focus on the use of substitutions and pentatonic scales. Substitutions is something that you'll definitely encounter in bebop, but the substitutions get a little bit more tense in post bop. So, you know, things like playing a third away from the chord, playing a half step away from the chord, whereas pentatonic scales, this is an innovation that was kind of penned by McCoy Tyner and John Coltrane, and later people like Woody Shaw and Kenny Garrett as a more contemporary example. This is basically just taking pentatonic scales and superimposing them over different chords to get more extended sounds, right? So for example, if I have D minor 7, I could just play D minor pentatonic over that. But if I wanted a more extended sound or a more complex or colorful sound over that, I could use A minor pentatonic or E minor pentatonic. Which would give me kind of a Dorian sound, right? But you can use the spaciousness or the openness of that pentatonic sound to create really wide intervallic lines that don't really clearly spell out the harmony by themselves, but on top of the harmony, it just ends up with this really colorful sound. So on our first post bop line, we're going to take a look at, we have again D minor 7, G7, C major 7. Over D minor 7, we're going to be using an A minor pentatonic scale, right? So just, you know, kind of mixing, matching the intervals of that scale. And then on G7, we have the use of A flat minor pentatonic, right? With the exception of one note, that B flat, that's going to be like the ninth of that implied A flat minor. And this is then tying a little bit closer to the full substitution of A flat minor 7, D flat 7. But this is something that you see McCoy Tyner do a lot, is just add in like the ninth of the pentatonic scale as well. So, you know, rather than just, you now have a 6-note scale. The second degree is being used more as, you know, part of like a triad that you could find within the scale in this instance. So something like, you know, that C major triad that you have there makes use of that E note as the second degree, but it's not really being used in passing like that. So we have that, again, A flat minor idea creating a lot of tension against G7. And then we have a delayed resolution on C major 7, hitting the sharp 5, moving up to the 6th, and then down to the 5th. And then the rest of that idea is going to be borrowed from E minor pentatonic, which is going to give you like a really strong C major 9 sound over that C major 7. Then after that, we have this approach into the 5th of D minor 7. We have more A minor pentatonic stuff happening then. But then we pivot into, again, more of that A flat minor sound against G7. Right? And then that last part of the line, starting from that A sharp, is going to be like playing a half step below the chord that's coming, basically. So this is like a B major 7 sharp 11 idea, which is a half step below C major 7, right? So you don't always have to play a really strong line that implies the sound of the 5 chord or its related scales. Sometimes you can just play movement, you know, so rather than G7 moving into C major 7, I could have B major 7 moving into C major 7, which is not only going to create all this tension against the 5 chord, but it's going to, you know, set up the C major 7 still in like a logical way, right? You feel all this tension moving into release. You can do the same thing with a half step above D flat major 7 moving into C major 7, for example. So our next post bop oriented phrase is going to be over a minor 2-5-1. So this is going to start on the flat 5 of D minor 7 flat 5, moving up to the flat 3rd, and then we have this structure here. You'll see these sort of intervallic structures a lot in post bop lines. You could relate it to a pentatonic scale. I'm kind of just thinking of it as being like an intervallic way of breaking up the regular scale. So this by itself, I'm thinking of it as coming out of D flat 7. So I'm already anticipating like the substitution that I'm going to use on the 5 chord, right? So I stay in that D flat 7 sound for G7. I use just the notes of the triad. And then I grab first the major 7th of C minor 7, and then I have this chromatic action that's going to move me down to the 5th of C minor 7. So major 7, flat 7, right? Major 7, flat 7, 6, flat 6, 5th, and then just down like an A minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio on that C minor 7. To highlight like a C minor 6 sound. So the second part of the line is going to make use of some motivic development, but we're also getting some really complex harmonic sounds through the use of just the repeating idea moving up in various intervals. So on D minor 7 flat 5, we use this kind of like, I'm thinking of it as like an F minor idea over D minor 7 flat 5, and those two are kind of the same chord change basically, right? So approaching that flat 5 of D minor 7 flat 5, and then we have this intervallic shape, right? Just going to highlight the 11th of D minor 7 flat 5, and then I move basically the same idea up a minor 3rd to highlight some altered tensions on G7, namely that sharp 9 and the flat 13, and then resolving into C minor 7, right, grabbing like a C minor major 7 sound. So another thing that you'll notice in post bop lines is they'll kind of mix and match different scale qualities for the same chord. So, you know, you might be on C minor 7, you can go between like a Dorian sound and a melodic minor sound, or harmonic minor even, just to, you know, get the shifting colors basically on one chord change. So hopefully all those concepts help you get the more complex harmonic sounds of post bop into your playing. So that concludes our video for today. Thanks for watching. Again, if you feel like digging a little bit deeper into any of these concepts, feel free to check out my latest resource with jazz lesson videos, The Evolution of Jazz Phrases. And feel free to use the coupon code EVOLUTION5 for an additional $5 off. And like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope to see you next time.